Again, for the umpteenth time, Jesus draws a crowd of people. It's amazing, but yet not surprising, that wherever Jesus went, there was a crowd of people. And that was his purpose for coming to the earth to start with. Be able to have an opportunity to tell the earth about who he was, what God's plan was, and to save souls. And this occasion, again, we find the same thing happening. People coming from all over. We're told they came from Judea, Jerusalem, the coastal region of Tyre and Sidon. And they came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And all the people were trying to touch him. Same scenario that we see in previous cases. Notice again that they separate the diseases from the unclean spirits. These are two separate categories of tragedies that people were suffering with in those days. And yet Jesus was able to cure both of them. As was the occasion, people were there. They were coming to heal and healed them. And so this was the occasion where Jesus then presents what we refer to as the Sermon on the Mount. I think we're all familiar with these passages. Some of us maybe to a larger extent than others, but we know what goes on here, and we're familiar with some of the verses that describe the teachings of Jesus during this particular meeting with his people. These are referred to as the Beatitudes. That's what we call them. And we could probably name most of these from memory if we had to. Each of them has a little different slant on how people are going to be blessed if they comply with Christ's request for lifestyle. Why do we refer to these as the Beatitudes? We think of attitude, these are good attitudes that we need to have, so we need to be these attitudes. That's why we call them Beatitudes.
The kind of person we should be.
Kind of person we should be. Yeah. Actually, the Latin version of the New Testament uses the word deity for the word beginning each of these verses. And that word means blessed or happy, and that's why we find a lot of our translations using the word blessed. Blessed is he that. But the word beatitude really comes from the Latin word deity that is found in the Latin version of the Bible recording these texts. It's a word that has a special meaning to us because we associate it with this particular scripture. When we look at these words are words of encouragement. Jesus was speaking to common, ordinary people, to people who were not necessarily in high authorities of position in the government, or specifically to the Jews. But he's speaking to just a common person on the street, and these people, he felt, needed some insight to what his kingdom was going to offer them. Because many of them did not have this happy life. And he says, you will be blessed if you will follow my instructions. And so it says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So many times in life, we don't feel like we can sit back and be poor in spirit or be humble. We're tempted to be aggressive and step out there and take what we think should be ours. But Jesus' teaching is the opposite of that. He goes on to say, blessed are they who mourn, for they should be comforted. We don't like to mourn. We don't like it when life brings us unhappiness. And yet Jesus says, if your life is being plagued with unfortunate events because of your righteousness, you hang in there, because eventually your righteousness will bring you happiness. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. This one seems to be maybe more difficult for a lot of people to attain, that hunger and thirst for righteousness. We can humble ourselves, we can be meek, and we can kind of make it through the difficult times, but to really have that drive, like that deer that panteth for the water that we sing about, that's a really, in my opinion, a high level of spiritual attainment. But it will bring us great rewards. Blessed are the merciful, they shall obtain mercy. The pure of heart. And I think most of us strive daily to have our hearts filled with nothing but purity. That brings us the promise of being able to see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus knew that his followers would experience a lot of these occasions where the Beatitudes could be implemented to make them better disciples and a happier group of disciples. So these were promises, basically, that Jesus was making to his followers as an encouragement to them. Then he begins to say, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. To say that you are the salt of the earth was a compliment. If I were to say, Jim is the salt of the earth, what do I mean by that? I mean that he's got the character that portrays value in life, that are real value. And he's not the kind of person that's out bragging and trying to impress people with attainment, climb the ladder of the social life. He's just down to earth, good old Jim, that makes a good difference in life around us. Salt, however, to these people in those days meant more than I think salt does to us. What does a pound of salt cost? Less than $1. And I think I bought a pound here a week or two ago. I don't know what it cost, less than $1. How long would that pound of salt last? Year, 2 years? Unless you really use a lot of salt, then usually it lasts a long, long time. So it doesn't appear to have much value to us in our culture because it's cheap and we don't really have to worry about getting enough salt to provide for our needs. But salt in those days had, I think, a more significant meaning of life. Salt to them was valuable. And our text suggests something that I did not know, that it was not unusual for people to use salt as a medium of payment, to pay people in wages. They needed salt in those days much more than we do. Giving flavor to food is a very valuable function of salt. And we can appreciate that aspect of how salt is. Any of you who have had heart surgery or heart problems, the doctor says you're going to have to cut down on your salt, you've got to use a salt substitute, begin to realize more than most of us how flavorful salt is. And it's really interesting that Job even refers to the flavor of salt. He says it's tasteless, or is tasteless food eaten without salt. Or is there flavor in the white of an egg? I refuse to touch it. Such food makes me ill. When's the last time you intentionally ate the white of an egg without salt? Kind of yucky, isn't it?
But they made me do it in the hospital.
If we do it, it's because they make us do it. But salt brings out the flavor of food. When we put salt on food, we don't just taste salt. We taste a combination of flavors. The result of what salt does to the taste of that food. And sometimes we sit down to eat a meal and we dish out a portion of a vegetable or something, and that needs a little salt. So it's all makes all the difference in the world. So from the aspect that salt helps bring out the good to light is, I think, interesting, and it helps portray the meaning that Jesus was trying to portray in his discourse to these people. You guys help bring out the best in other people. Bring out that part that before is tasteless. But with what you can combine in their lives, in their knowledge and their practice, then things can be much more productive and beneficial than they are without you. Salt has a multiple number of purposes. One that is mentioned is that it can create thirst. If you go to the movie theater and get this big, juicy, aroma-filled box of popcorn, guess what? About halfway through that, you're thirsty. And you've been tricked. Now you got to go back and buy a $5 drink to get rid of that thirst. In a spiritual sense, God says you guys can create a thirst for righteousness. You can create that desire for people to want to reach out and seek what God has to say. Interesting tidbit about salt in that regard. But also in Leviticus, the 2nd chapter, this I did not know. But notice in 2 verses here where instructions are given on what you are to do before you present your grain offering to God as a sacrifice. Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offering. Add salt to all your offerings. 3 times he mentions that in those 2 short verses. Put salt on the grain offering. Why? God's not going to eat the grain. But it's a symbol of we are making what we offer to God the best we can. It needs that salt. Yes.
My dad's Parkinson's doctor told him, well, it was at a conference, and he said, ladies, stop taking the salt shaker away from your husbands because the salt helps the medications work better.
It has a lot of uses.
Not overdo it, but...
Right. I remember when Dad had his heart surgery, the doctor said no salt. Well, Mother was very caring about taking care of Dad and concerned, and so she just took away all the salt. We went back a few weeks later, and the doctor examined Dad, and he could tell something wasn't just right, and found out, Mother had taken away all the salt. And so he said, Rachel, you got to feed that guy some salt. You're going to kill him. We have to have salt, even when the doctors try to restrict the portion of salt that we eat. It has a multitude of uses. Salt was a preservative. I can recall when I was probably pre-grade school, we did not have electricity. Therefore, we did not have refrigerators. We had what I still refer to as a refrigerator, an icebox. Now, icebox means you had this insulated cabinet, and the iceman would come by 2 times a week, and you'd take this big block of ice, and you would chip it up, and you would put it in your cabinet, or icebox, as we called it. So meat was not something that we could store like we do now. So it was not uncommon for, at least I can remember 2 occasions in my young life where Dad would take 2 or 3 of the hogs from the pasture. Some of his friends would come over and they would slaughter them and hang them up in a tree, and they would butcher them and cut them up in chunks, cover them up with salt, and put them in the smokehouse, as we called it. We didn't really smoke it, but the previous owner built that house for a smokehouse, but that's where we kept our meat. And so occasionally, Mom would send me out to the smokehouse to get a bunch of meat to bring in for breakfast or whatever. Some of you older folks know what that's like. Salt preserves. And in those days, it was very common. Fishermen would put salt, on their fish so that it would keep. I don't know how long it takes fish to spoil, but I don't want to find out in terms of eating something that hadn't been preserved in some fashion. But I assume it wouldn't take. What Jesus is saying here, without Christians, the world would be like rotten meat. We know everything around us is getting worse and worse. Our attitude about holiness seems to be vanishing. Our morality is in despair. It's all because there hasn't been enough of godly salt spread over our culture. We as a society have tried to address all of these immoral issues, trying to make our country better by science, and our author lists education and psychology and psychiatrists and technology. And if we can't accomplish it that way, then we'll legislate morality. So our legislation has got involved. Social reform. All of these approaches that our leaders have taken to try to make life here what it should be. Well, they've got the wrong goal in mind to start with. They didn't need to focus on what God wants instead of what they think is best. And applying this kind of solution would make a big difference. Just imagine what the world would be like without the influence of Christ. We see what Sodom and Gomorrah ended up being, because people did not know God. And our nation would end up that same way if we're not able to find Christians who are going to go out there and make themselves useful in showing what Christ is like and what God wants us to be like. So with this, Jesus says, you guys are really valuable. You are a necessary item or element in what I'm trying to accomplish. So with this compliment, he then gives them a challenge. Since you had the opportunity to flavor those around you with righteousness, then he says, you've got to be different. Salt is different. Don't become like the world. Salt has distinctive attributes, and the Christian has distinctive attributes. He says, don't be conformed to the world. You've got to be different from the world so that your influence will change the world and the world not change you. Then he goes on to say, don't have friendship with the world. Do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Worldliness and godliness are on opposite ends of the spectrum. And if we begin to desire those things that the world offers, then we become more of an enemy of God than we do a friend of God. And yet, that temptation is strong, isn't it? It's difficult. So, Jesus, in other places, not in the sermon, but he says, don't be a friend of the world. And he says, don't love the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. The world and God are so opposite that you cannot be neutral. You're either going to be a friend to the world an enemy of God, or vice versa. And to keep ourselves in an effective role in our society, and we've got to keep ourselves as salt and not as the world is. So, the challenge is don't become tasteless. He says, if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown and trampled underfoot by men. Salt that went bad. No. Then why does Jesus say if the salt loses its flavor?
It was different back then.
Now, that salt back then wasn't pure like our refined iodine super duper salt that we have nowadays. It had foreign elements in it. And those foreign elements sometimes would allow that salt to lose its saltiness. His point, I think, is this, as we look back from our day and age, if we allow those foreign elements of the world to get into our lives, there is the danger of us losing our saltiness. And then he says, you become worthless. What good are you? If you can't change the bad to good, then you're worthless. And they just throw you on the ground so that the road on which you're thrown can have you packed into the dirt, and you're basically without any purpose. So there is that warning and that responsibility, or the challenge that he gives us in regard to that. So then he goes on to another example, one that is very common to all, and that is referring to the people as the light of the world. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a bushel, but on the lampstand. And it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Again, another compliment. You guys are the light of the world. You have an important function in what I'm trying to accomplish. Light is a characteristic of God in Christ. God is light, according to 1 John 1:15. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. So when Jesus says, you are the light of the world, he's saying, you are the light like I am the light. And we think of the function of the moon. The moon, boy, the last few days, especially 2 or 3 days ago, wasn't the moon so bright? I mean, it was just astounding. I got ready to go to bed one evening, and I thought I'd left the yard light on. The light was shining through the windows so brightly. Does the moon have any light? What makes it appear to have light?
Sun.
It's a reflection from the sun. So we have no light of our own, but when we reflect godliness through our life, then we become a light to the world. So when Jesus says, you're the light of the world, he says, you guys are a reflection of God and myself. That's a compliment, isn't it? You bring light into a dark world. When God created the universe, there was no light. It was dark. And so he said, let there be light. And then light appeared. The world is full of darkness. We know what it's like at nighttime when the sun is gone and the moon is very small. It's dark out there. And the influence of Satan makes the world dark in the eyes of God. It has to have something to offset that darkness. And the good thing about light is it dispels darkness. The world, however, for some strange reason, because I suppose the influence of Satan is stronger than the influence of God, they tend to want the dark rather than the light. Darkness attracts most people more than light does. It gives them what they think will bring them happiness. It's unrestraining. They can do whatever they want to do and not have to worry about someone criticizing them for their behavior. I like the illustration that our text gives about the guy who went to his rent house that had been vacated for some time, and he turned on the lights. It was nighttime, and the cockroaches just ran everywhere. They like that darkness, and when light comes, they don't want that. That is such a good illustration of what most people in the world are like. They want to be in an environment that's dark, secluded, where no one's watching, and then when the light comes on, they run. Well, that reaction is similar to what Christ is saying here. As the light of the world, you cause those people who love darkness to vanish. You make a difference. You make a change in the surroundings about you because you are light. You expose the hidden things of the world. Who's going to point out what's right and wrong if God's people don't? We'll leave it up to Congress? Well, I hope not. We are the only influence out there who is going to help people see that, hey, this isn't right after all. Our Creator says that we've got to stop this. We've got to repent. We've got to make a change so that we will be better and our society will be better. So again, he gives them a challenge. After complimenting them about how great they are, how important they are, so he says, let your light shine then before men that they may see your good works. It doesn't do any good for us to try to keep our Christianity a secret. You know, that's like putting a light under a bushel. The light is made to shine, and so other people can see it. And he's not saying here, let your light shine so men can see you, but he says so that they can see your good works. And then he goes on to say, so that they may glorify your Father who is in heaven. We're not trying to elevate ourselves and to say, hey, look how good I am. Don't you want to be as good as I am? And now we're saying what good is reflected through my life is because of the righteousness of God that has been brought to the world, and God working through me can bring about good things. Our good works, again, are a reflection of godliness, not ourselves. And when Christians live their life effectively, others are going to make note of that. And in many cases, they will say, there's something bringing about a good result here that I've got to check into that and see. But this seems to be better than what I thought I really wanted in life. So then he changes to the teachings of the law. Now, Christ came to fulfill the law, not to abolish it. And it's a little bit difficult sometimes for us to fully understand what he meant by that. Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. But truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until it is all accomplished. When Jesus came, it appeared that he was opposing the Jewish religion. It's like he was saying, okay, you guys, forget completely all of this temple stuff and all these sacrifices and things that you've been following for centuries. let me tell you what it's like. To the Jews especially, that was like he was trying to contradict what had been so precious to them in all the past centuries. They said, no, I didn't come to do away with it, to abolish it, but I came to fulfill it. And I think the explanation that is given in our text is a good way for us to understand what that means. If we think of the law of Moses as a covenant, which it was an agreement between God and man. And God says, if you will live this kind of life and put me first and follow my commands, then you will be blessed in this way. So it's a contract. You keep up your contract, promise, and I'll keep up mine. However, when it's time for that contract to be over, then it's put in a drawer and you go on to something else. And he gives the example of like buying a house. Those of you who have bought a house had a contract to sign before it's purchased. You saw the house that you liked. The seller wanted X number of dollars from you. So a contract legally is an agreement between two people where there is a value that exchanges hands. So when you bought that house, you signed that contract, you said, okay, I'm going to check this out, make sure that the boundaries are what they are, and they'll give me some time, give me 30 days, I'll go to the bank and get the money, and I promise you that I will buy this house. Unless I find something, that's wrong. That's an agreement, that's a contract. Well, when everything is completed, you get the money, at the closing, you sign, and it's over. The house is yours, but the contract now has no purpose. And that's really what the law was all about. God had this agreement. Until this is completed, here's our agreement. You follow my rules, I will bless you immensely. And when Christ came along, the world bought the house. It was completed. And God had promised, even in the old law, prophesied about a greater day coming. So that was what Jesus was trying to tell the people. He didn't really object to the law. Now, he had some objections to their interpretation or their modification and all the additions to the law that they had, but not the law itself. So he begins to make some comparisons. Murder versus anger. You've heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable in court. But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. So you don't have to commit murder to be guilty. Anger itself is enough to disappoint God. Adultery versus lust. He goes on to say, you've heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her already commits adultery in his heart. So it's a little more refined concept here. Divorce versus reason. Whoever sends his wife away according to the old law, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for the reason of unchastity, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. You don't have the right just to give your wife a writ of divorcement for any circumstance. There has to be marital unfaithfulness. Vows versus simple yes or no. We're told that you shall not make false vows, but you shall fulfill your vows to the Lord. I say, however, Just let your yes be yes and no, no. You don't have to go into this big ordeal of, I'm making a vow, I'm proclaiming my vow, I'm going to keep my vow, and since I've made the vow and you know about my vow, then you can rest assured that what I say is true. Said, no, you don't have to go to all that. Just if you say yes, people will know that you mean yes, and you're going to be faithful to whatever you say. Retaliation versus non-resistance, the one that I don't like. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, he says, you've heard it say. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. Fortunately, I've never had anyone slap me on the cheek, but if they did, I don't think I would turn the other one. I would probably resist and get the tar beat out of myself, but that's part of me that I don't know that I would be able to comply with without a lot of effort. Maybe I would. He said, you don't retaliate. Vengeance belongs to God. And he's a much better revenger than we are. And then he says, love your enemies, and instead of hating them. Another difficult teaching that human nature finds hard to swallow. Then when it comes to the acts of religion, Jesus was fed up with the scribes and the Pharisees and how they had diluted all those things that otherwise would have been good. He talks about giving to the poor. Now, giving to the poor was a sacred thing in the Old Testament. It was something that God had set up, wanting those who had to give to those who did not have, because people who are truly in need need someone to help them. So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Rather, he said, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. Do it in secret. The good will be accomplished, and God will be praised rather than you be praised. Meaningless repetition. When you pray, do not use meaningless repetitions as the Gentiles do, for they suppose that they will be heard for their many words. Doesn't take a 5-minute prayer for God to hear you. Simply speak from the heart and in a private way, and that will accomplish. Along those same lines, he says, when you fast, don't put on this gloomy face and try to let everybody know how much you're suffering because you're fasting. But rather, do it in a way that's not even noticed by men. Put forth effort to make it a secret. I'm fasting, but no one needs to know that but me. Basically, taking away the showiness of religion and replacing it with sincere, heartfelt sacrifice as God really wants. Next week, we'll look at the second half of the Sermon on the Mount. You can read about that in pages 243 to 282. I still have 3 tests from the first test over here that have been turned in. They're graded, ready for you to pick up. And if any of you want to turn in last week's test, I will take those. If you want a test and weren't here last week, let me know and I'll give you the second test. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Same time.